defense. Now, so that's really all I'm going to do to my firearms. Now, there is one other thing that I will tune that a lot of people are really going to disagree with me on. Certain guns, I will put a heavier firing pin spring in those striker fired guns. The reason I do that is because a heavier spring doesn't ever affect the reliability of it. It will actually because it makes the firing pin hit harder. And so I will oftentimes go up a half pound on that from the factory ones, or even a full pound depending on what the firearm is. And so let's say Glock uses a 5.5 pound firing pin spring. Aftermarket ones, you can buy ones that are 6 pound springs. Well, that spring is eventually going to wear out, so you have to replace it at some point in time anyways. I replace it with a 6 pound spring for two reasons. The first reason is because as it wears out, it actually still will cycle that ammo reliably, right? Because as it wears out, it's getting less and less force on there, so you get actually a little bit more time out of that spring before we start developing problems with it, or before we need to change it out. But the other and the absolute biggest reason that I do it with is because with modern day reloading and the amount of factory reloads that you get a lot of really cheap primers out there, these overseas primers that have low quality tolerances in their factory manufacturing of them. And so the primer cups tend to be real thick. And so those 5 pound, 4.5 pound striker springs, they tend to not cycle some of those rounds super reliably. So I make sure, and oftentimes I will upgrade that firing pin spring to give it a little bit more strength. But again, whenever we do an upgrade that affects the mechanics of it, we only do one upgrade at a time to make sure that we have time to test that upgrade, make sure that it works, that it functions, that we don't have any issues with it. But as a general rule, I don't like to mess with the internals of the firearms. Like I said, that kind of the one exception on there is I will swap out those firing pin springs on certain firearms. Certain firearms seem to be a little bit lighter duty on the firing pin spring, and seem to have more problems with that. Not a big issue for shooting factory, hydroshocks or whatever, defensive loads, right? Good quality defensive loads. But it does become a problem during your training sessions when you're shooting reloads or NATO rounds or bulk ammunition, whatever it is. It becomes a little bit more of an issue. So keep that in mind. But as a general rule, those are about the only things I really want to look at changing on a factory firearm. Realize this factory firearm functions flawlessly as it needs to from the factory. So there is no reason to do that. Unless I absolutely have to, or I have done my research. I know that will give me some advantages. So there's no hard and fast rule for this, but those are really the only considerations I want to give to a defensive use firearm. Guys, I really appreciate y'all watching. Make sure and like and subscribe to the channel if you have not already done so, and we'll catch y'all in the next one.